Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. I wanted to do another one today after everything that happened yesterday. There's still a lot happening and a lot to cover and talk about just with the news as things are picking up, moving along, and still kind of coming up in the media. There's a lot to talk about still with Nunez for now, but not just Nunez, more on the striker situation in general. There's stuff to talk about on Frankie de Jong. And then I'd like to talk about some of the other options and overall what really constitutes a rebuild and what United should be looking at in terms of a rebuild and what they really shouldn't, in my opinion anyway. So, first with regards to Nunez, not to talk about it because I think that United will sign him or that there's any chance, but because there's still news and I want to cover it. Obviously, after everything yesterday on United's side from Dawson, Ogden, and a few others, there were still reports that United intend to rival Liverpool for Nunez. They didn't want to get into a bidding war, but they weren't seemingly worried about what Liverpool were doing, while Benfica want an auction, of course, to bid things up to get 100 million. And today what's come out is from The Athletic and Ornstein and James Pearce is that Liverpool have agreed personal terms with Darwin Nunez, but they have not agreed a fee with Benfica. This is pretty typical Liverpool. The goal is, I think I mentioned this on the video yesterday, but their goal is to get every other team out of the running, get everybody thinking the player's head is totally turned and they're set on coming to Liverpool, and then negotiate a better fee. And they may do that. That looks like what is going to happen. That looks like the most likely outcome from all of this. Something that United could have done weeks ago. They could have pressed ahead to negotiate personal terms, agree to it, and put it out there in the media to push other clubs away. But they have not agreed a fee. They didn't agree terms with the player fully. They didn't press ahead to get something official. Again, nothing's signed even in Liverpool's case. They made that clear. I don't know. They're being very specific about it in the reporting. You don't usually see Ornstein breaking, the personal terms thing without the agreement on the deal as his big kind of exclusive. Maybe they're being wary just because of the situation, but United aren't even mentioned in the article, so maybe not. But again, United could have done this weeks ago to keep the competition down. He would have accepted terms from United if they had really pushed ahead in talks with Mendes to do that. The other side of that is that in their discussions in terms of offers and things, I'm not sure that they were putting together or really, presenting anything concrete. But we've covered all that, the mistakes United have made on this deal for weeks. The only thing now that is still being reported by Pedro Sepulveda in Portugal and by the individual in Uruguay who broke some of the other transfers. Pedro Sepulveda is probably Portugal's best reporter. He said that United will be meeting with Mendes today in a European city. I believe this is in Madrid. It's where Mendes was last night after leaving Barcelona. And the Uruguay reporter saying that Liverpool have increased their offer and Mendes and the player will decide in the coming hours between United, Liverpool, and Newcastle are still in there. Not that they'll accept that, but Newcastle have, of course, made a bid earlier. So I think this will at least provide some definite conclusion. They'll speak with Mendes, find out if it's too far along, what the actual situation is, and following this meeting, I imagine, then you'll get the backing off of the deal for, Darwin Nunez totally. Or moving ahead, but there's probably, a 1% chance of that. Let's be real. This looks very, very dead. Before we get into the next bit, the only thing I want to talk about on this, and I hinted at it on the video yesterday, is I wouldn't believe a word that comes out of United's mouth through their reporters over the next few days about the Darwin Nunez thing after it collapses and after Liverpool signed him. I'm going to do, after this is done, if it finishes negatively the way that it's looking, I'm going to do a series of 3 or 4 videos that from summer 2020 where I basically gained some genuinely absurd information that was, it's indisputable information, I put it that way. And I don't have that level of information for now or for 2021 or for 2019. I only had it for a brief time, but it was genuinely indisputable, this information. There's a lot of people in our community who are aware of what, of who this, not who this source was, but how good this source of information was, like how perfect it was. And I'm going to do a video on it, on a few different things on what happened in 2020. Talk about Sancho and how, what actually happened in 2020 with that. Talk about Sarr, a name that was not talked about a lot in 2020, but there was a hell of a lot more going on behind the scenes than they ever let on with regards to Sarr from Watford. Talk about Thiago, another one where there was a hell of a lot that went on that they did not let anybody know. And a few other things as well. And one of the biggest things is United's strategy for how they deal with deals in media and kind of their briefing strategy. They have and again, I can only comment on knowing the detail of it at that time, but it seems like they still do it all the time the exact same way. And they have a very, very kind of focused strategy on protecting how they look in media, and I think it's a bit silly. And I think it's silly not just because it's weird, the necessity to constantly try to cover up mistakes, but it's also doesn't work. And everybody can see through it, and I don't know who they think that they're fooling with it, except that they do. They do. And what comes out through the reporters is not reality. Much of the time, and they'll pretend, and things go out there like they were never interested, never working on deals. I mean, back when Woodward was running things during this time in 2020, what got out, I mean, there were leaks and things, but man, it was mostly controlled. They did not let quite a few things out there that could have got out there simply because it would have made them look bad. And so it's interesting in that, and I get it. Not everything that United does in transfer has to be under a microscope, but it's also not really true a lot of the times what actually goes out there. A lot of the stories that end up out there are there to protect their reputation and make it look like, when they talk about how there was never close, how they were never interested, how they were never in talks, these kinds of things. Not always true. Not always true at all. And that was the strategy in 2020. But I'll do a video series in detail on this because I think it's worth mentioning, and I think United fans in general and people should at least know and be aware of it. I think it's something that really needs to change at United. I think it's ridiculous. And it's something, I've tried to talk to certain people about it. I haven't gotten so far in attempts to talk about it with certain people around United, in trying to get them to understand that their media strategy doesn't work, and it has often the opposite effect on United fans. But I'll cover all that in more detail now. I don't want to, wasn't really the subject of what I was trying to talk about, but it just something that I think needs to be discussed, and I only want to mention it now because what you'll see over the next few days, as this, Nunez deal is falling apart, so long as it does fall apart as expected, maybe not exactly what is the reality of the situation. So anyway, moving on from that, let me talk about personally my problem with this Nunez deal in general. Is now, you have people saying you shouldn't be paying 100 million. Well, it's not 100 million. It's 80. Liverpool have never offered 100 million. They've offered 80. Those add-ons are not agreed because at the moment they're unrealistic. They're things like Ballon d'Or clauses and all of that. So it's 80. And the simple fact of the matter is United should pay 80 million euros for a top striker. Look at the striker market. It's awful. And look what the next rumor is that's coming out today. That Antony's reps are in England for a transfer. 60 million euros for Antony. That's a terrible, terrible deal. If you're telling me that Antony is 60 million, then yes, Nunez is 100 million. But 80? Easily. Much better value. Antony's not ready. That's not a player who's ready. Rafinha is a $65 million euros price tag player. Dominic Calvert-Lewin, his price is around 50. Victor Osimhen is 125 million, and they paid, 80 million for him last year when he had a season probably not as good as Nunez. That's the striker market. Ekitike, we've talked about, going to Newcastle, 45 million. I mean, look at the market for attackers and the prices. 80 million for Nunez up front actually looks like good value when you compare it to 60 million for Antony. That's a 30 million euro player. Maybe 40 at a push. But look at what has happened to other wingers from Ajax like that who are not that physical, who are not polished. David Neres is basically nowhere now after he got hyped up and was at one point discussed about a 50 million or 40 million purchase. It's dangerous. These are not players who are close to ready. And next year when United need a striker, it's going to get worse. This is actually a big year for the young strikers moving, if you think about it. Sorry, something just got posted that Ten Hag is currently meeting with Mendes in Portugal to try to bring in Darwin Nunez. I mean, the point I want to make about this is that this is a player that Ten Hag really wants. Really, really, really wants. And if you want him, you pay the 80 million for him. He's your new manager. You do it. Because the market is bad and it's going to get worse. Next year, United need a striker. It's going to be worse. Nunez gone. Nkunku may get a release clause that will take him to Bayern after Lewandowski is gone. Going to be competing with all of these players. Who's out there? This isn't going to get better. There are a few options and it may get worse next summer. Even 80 for Nunez and 60 to 65 for Jong, we'll talk about that in a minute, is our budget before sales. It's worth it. It's worth buying starting 11 players to push others down in depth. We're supposed to close the gap to City and Pool, and they're getting Haaland, they're getting Diaz, already got Diaz, they're getting potentially Nunez, they bought Fabio Carvalho, City are getting Phillips and Cucurella. Look at this, what's going on here. These are the clubs we're competing against, we're not competing against Arsenal. That's not how people need to be thinking. I mean, the simple fact that this morning Erik ten Hag has flown to Portugal to meet with Mendes to try to pull off Darwin Nunez. You have to back him. You have to give him what he wants. You have to spend the money. And the club need to do it. I don't buy that we're trying to close the gap to Tottenham and Arsenal. We finished second last year and above those clubs the year prior as well. The squad will look a lot better under Ten Hag. That is a fact. I'm 100% sure of it. But buying more mid-tier players isn't going to improve us. We literally will just reach the same ceiling we had under Ole. People know this, and I don't know why they start to swing the other direction when they start talking about a rebuild. You don't buy depth. You buy starting 11 players to push your starters into depth. That's how you build a great team. You buy starting 11 players. We have a better squad than Tottenham. We have a better squad than Arsenal, regardless of how they performed last year. We finished above them before adding Varane, before adding Sancho, before adding Cristiano Ronaldo. Come on. We need to buy starting 11 players. We need 2 or 3 starting 11 players. If you take this squad and get it performing up to a top level under a great coach like Ten Hag, and then you add 2 to 3 on there, that gap will disappear. And I don't buy for a second that United do not need that striker. Just last year, between Cavani and number 11, there was 41 games played. And we were very thin up front, even with that. Needed one in January. 41 games. And we should have got one in January. And Ronaldo a year older. This is a huge, huge problem. The next year, if we can get 2 to 3 in, starting 11 players, get 2 more. And again, it's not, like I said, if you couldn't get Nunez, go throw the 80 million at Nkunku. I don't care. My point is, if Ten Hag sees that they need a striker, go get a top striker this summer, period. Do it. Anyone that he wants, go get it. Because it's that necessary and we should spend whatever it costs for it. United have the money. They cannot play broke. To me, that's what you have to do. We're not going to get anywhere if we sign, Oxlade-Chamberlain, if you sign Antony, you sign these types of players. We're not going to get anywhere. And that doesn't mean I suggest ignoring the midfield. United should spend $200 million this summer. They should, and that would be enough. I'd be happy with it. Get Frankie de Jong for 60, 65. Get Nunez for 80. Get another midfielder on top of that. Spend the money. Clear out. We've cleared out an enormous number of players. When you're doing a rebuild, it also depends what you're rebuilding towards. Arsenal haven't had Champions League in 8 years. How long now? 10 years almost? What are they rebuilding towards when they're rebuilding? They're rebuilding to try to get back into top 4. We're not rebuilding to get back into top 4 just because we missed 1 year. We've been in and out of top 4 every other year. That means we're a 4th place club. And a rebuild means rebuild towards first. Rebuild towards winning. Liverpool, they bought some clever players, but they didn't go out and buy a bunch of mid-tier players to get back on top. Once they brought in Klopp, look at the signings. They weren't all incredibly expensive, but it was a different market even when they bought some of these, and they would be more expensive now, but they were still expensive for the time. Salah today, they bought him for a decent fee, but was it 45 or 50, 60? With the stats he had before they bought him, today, that's 80. Fabinho was expensive. Van Dijk was a record at the time. Alisson was a record at the time. Konate wasn't cheap. Diaz wasn't cheap, 50 million. Nunez, they're looking at 100. These are big, big deals for very big players that they bring in. I mean, Naby Keita was a 50 million signing, and it doesn't all work out, but you do what you must. Chelsea keep popping up and winning the league again every few years. Why? Look at their purchases. They don't buy mid players to rebuild. They went and bought Havertz, and again, they don't all work out. But it doesn't matter. They just keep doing it. They don't say, oh, it didn't work, so now we're going to buy crap players. No. They go out, they sign, Havertz, Werner, all these players in one summer. They spend big. They spend big, big money. And they buy top players or players they believe are top players. And then they win the league every year. They don't buy mid players to try to get back on top. If we start going down the route of, don't buy top players, you end up like Arsenal, where you buy, Ben Whites and these are the types of players that you buy, and they rebuild by buying 4 or 5 30 million players, and they still end up in 5th or 6th. And I know people are burnt by purchases like Pogba, leaving this year, and that's why they're scared of big signings. But you don't stop buying top players just because you've done poorly. You just buy better. Varane, Sancho are still good signings, and you can make good signings. Bruno Fernandes is still a great signing. You can make good signings. It's not like all these top purchases have been bad. They need to do it. They need to make top signings. They need a top striker, and they need a top midfielder. So let's talk about de Jong. My understanding is a formal bid is not been made yet. United have proposed in discussion to 60 plus 20, but it has not been accepted by Barcelona. At this time, they're considering it, but they likely are looking for a bit more. But it's moving, and I think it's moving in the right direction, and I do think they will. I think at this point they'll get it over the line. There's some willingness on his side, but Barcelona are still holding out for a little bit of an unreasonable fee considering the circumstances that they are in, and I think they'll work to change that. I don't have any updates on it yet, but they're still talking, and I think as this Nunez thing is obviously progressing, then it could make a big difference here. I mean, obviously, I don't know. I think that he would get both of these players in now if he could. Erik ten Hag, I mean. So, let's see what happens with that, because obviously that's going to affect the budget and what goes on and how much money is there. But they promised ten Hag quite a lot. And I have a feeling that he's saying, you promised me what I wanted, that I could at least get a few of these big players in, and, let's just go for it. And I think they'll give him the money for both if he can convince, Mendes and Nunez now to join United. So let's see what happens there, and I think in the end, he'll get the money, but he needs to get it. He should be given the money to get a top striker and a top midfielder if those are his priorities, whatever it costs, 150, 160, whatever it costs, he should get the money. So let's see. Hopefully we'll see the outcome of this Nunez thing maybe today, and then perhaps the Barcelona thing will be closing with Jong in the next few days as well. I don't have any updates on Timber. He's another move that was put on the back burner that doesn't make sense. I hope right after international break they move forward and close. But if they say we're not going to buy until we sell Timber because we want Jong and a striker in, so be it. Fine with me. I think it makes sense if that's what Ten Hag wants, and clearly it's becoming obvious what he wants. The other name, as I mentioned, keep an eye on Matheus Nunez, just as a potential midfielder. There's not much there yet. I hope I'll get some more significant updates tomorrow, but just wanted to cover the latest. So, could be a very interesting day overall. The updates that are coming in just while I'm recording this are kind of wild. I did not expect to hear Ten Hag flying to Portugal, but it just goes to show how badly they want this deal to be done, and potentially how poorly United acted in not resolving this situation weeks ago. So anyway, enjoyed the video. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Give me your thoughts about all of this below, and I'll see you in the next one.